The sportsbooks have told us how they feel about the Phoenix Suns. It's probably too extreme to call it hate, but they might be questioning this team. We'll jump around on the latest championship MVP and win total odds on today's episode of Locked On Suns.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. Happy Monday. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon, Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 6 seasons, a writer at Suns.com, and the host of the Just Basketball Show wherever you get your podcasts. A big thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen to start a new week, closing out July. We're free and available everywhere. All you have to do is search Locked On Suns wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube. Hit that follow or subscribe button. Get us in your feed every single Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for the month of August, but that is just short term. You'll get us in your feed every day starting next month through the entirety of the season. So become an everyday or get locked onto the Suns each and every day by hitting that button. You can also drop a comment below with your thoughts on the odds. It is that time of year where the books have dropped their odds, but nobody's really started betting yet, which makes it a perfect time to check in on how the market sort of, or I guess the non-market sort of feels here before anyone really gets in and any moves or trades or injuries or anything really happen. Joining me as he does every single Monday, Brendon Dueñas, a writer at Bright Side of the Sun. And let's just dive into it, Brendon. I feel like the best place to start is honestly the championship odds. Because it might be where the Suns are the most respected, if you want to call it that. And I think that's even a little bit of an extreme. But in the West, the Nuggets are plus 480, the Suns are plus 650. And then sandwiched between that, you have the Celtics just a bit above the Nuggets, and then the Bucks just a bit above the Suns. Does that feel like the top four right now? Do you feel like FanDuel is where we're getting these odds? They are the official partner of the Locked On Podcast Network, of course. Do you feel like it's a top four of those four teams right now? Do you think there's anyone that should be in there? Do you think anything? What are your observations at that group at the top right now, Brendon?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with this top four. You can argue the order, but I think if I was going to spend my own money, that's kind of the way I look at it. Like these are probably the four best bets. And I think Denver being in front of Phoenix will, upset some Suns fans, but at the end of the day, they won the title. It's their title to defend. They brought pretty much everyone back. Outside of Brown. And, but yeah, I think to me, those are the clear top four. I do like the Suns value though, plus 650. I feel like that's it's showing respect, but at the same time, there's some hesitance, which is fair. I think there's injury concerns. Yeah. There's how is this team going to mesh? There's definitely some things they're going to have to work out throughout the regular season, which is why I think some of those regular season odds we'll get into later are what they are. But yeah, as far as title, like this, it feels about right, more or less, just at first glance.
Where do you think the Heat end up if they do get Dame? Let's say that they trade Lillard and they lose, as far as like the important players, let's say they lose Hero and they lose Caleb Martin. Which do they jump above the Bucks? Do they jump all the way to the top of the East, above Boston as well? What do you think happens there? Because they're sitting here at fifth right now at plus 1,000. That feels like FanDuel trying to get a little bit ahead of people, not getting a too big of a value, but also not wanting to, crush people if Lillard doesn't end up getting there.
Yeah, that's the tricky part about placing these bets, especially this early. That's also, like you said, you could hit a really nice value right now if you place it and he ends up there. But if he doesn't at the same time, like Miami would drop considerably. So it's definitely one of those risks that I think some people are trying to get ahead of, but I'd put them in the same tier as the Bucks and Celtics. Like I don't think they'd be the favorites in the East, but I think they would jump from that, probably 6-7 seed without him, which is what I think they would be. Which people will say that's disrespect. That'd be better than they did last year. And that's without Dame. But with Dame, I think they're a top 3 seed in the East and definitely have a chance to take a title.
So people can obviously check out Locked On Heat for deeper analysis. I know this is not a Heat podcast, but it is the NBA news of going on right now. I mean, to me, I would put them a clear cut above the other teams. I mean, we'll see what their full roster ends up looking like. I understand depth might be a problem, but I think that top three of Dame, Jimmy, and Bam to me is better than what Boston has now with Porzingis, better than what Milwaukee has with their age concerns, and can those Lopez and Drew do it again concerns in terms of their amazing offensive seasons last year. So I would put Miami at the top if they do get this done. I wouldn't be surprised too if they just get a lot of action once bets do start to come in, and maybe by the beginning of the season they are at the best odds. The place that I'll go here with the Suns to return us there, Brandon, is I'm actually surprised the Suns are getting so much respect in this particular category. Maybe it's just that people do think that the star talent stuff in terms of a championship is actually like that's where it's valuable, is having three awesome scorers and playmakers is particularly going to come in handy in the playoffs, and that's why they're here. But I have to admit, I was surprised. I mean, they are more than double the odds of the Warriors and Lakers. Like, the Suns are getting some love here from FanDuel that I honestly didn't expect. I thought the Nuggets would be on their own, and then the rest of the West would be a little bit of a cluster. And it kind of feels like that's how things are getting talked about by fans and analysts and everything else, is that the Suns are more in line with the rest of the other teams rather than in a clear number two position.
Yeah. And I'm actually not that shocked, to be honest, just because when you have that type of firepower, like, obviously, you got to kind of block out the outside noise of like NBA Twitter and all that, and all the memes and hating of the Suns and all the, just injury concerns, because like if the Suns go in the playoffs with those three guys healthy, they, from a talent perspective, they have the best big three in the NBA. It's not even close. So to me, that's why the odds makers are kind of stacking that. But obviously, like there are health concerns that are very realistic, and that's kind of what drops them a little bit. But otherwise, just on paper, like, to me, they should be, I would have them as the clear favorites in the West if they're entering the playoffs completely healthy. But again, that's a complete long shot, and health, potential trades, all these factors are definitely a part of like the odds makers making these lines. So I think they're about where I expected them, more or less. But yeah, the gap from the rest of the West, I think it's kind of a combination of the Suns being more talented and no one else really standing out outside of Denver.
Sure. Yeah, and a lot of change. I mean, like, not key pieces, but the Warriors bench is pretty much has to turn over every year because of their cap stuff, and the Lakers are in a similar spot. I mean, I think some people feel like the Lakers maybe got even better, but you still need to kind of see it. They really only had one half or like 1/3 of a season in the regular season where they were really much of anything. I had a Reddit question last week that I did on the mailbag where somebody just asked me kind of like a maybe under the radar team that worries you from a matchup standpoint for the Suns. I mean, the Nuggets are an obvious answer just because of Jokic, and they just lost to that team in the playoffs and everything else. But is there another team in the West, regardless of these odds? But, again, there's really not a lot of Western Conference teams high up on this list that you feel like people should kind of have their eye on, of like, if the Suns get them in a first or second round matchup, like, it might be tougher than we think.
Yes. And this one might surprise some people. I think the Thunder are going to be a force this season. I think they're going to be an absolute nightmare in the playoffs. I think they're going to rise. Like, honestly, it would not shock me if they're a top 4 or 5 seed in the West. Like, I think they might not even be a first round matchup for the Suns. Like, that's the type of leap I think they're going to take this year. Just that young talent kind of meshing together, and the athleticism, the youth, all that. They're going to be, I think they're going to have that kind of similar path that the Pelicans took a couple of years back, but maybe a little bit of a higher ceiling. And like, assuming that Chet, which is like kind of like their Zion, stays healthy, that's the key, really. But yeah, the talent there is like off the charts, and they're a team that, like, it would not shock me at all if they made a crazy leap this season and gave a team like the Suns some trouble in the first round if they were to match up with them.
I like it. I'm super high on the Thunder. I guess I just sort of wonder if they're going to want to push that hard, and that really to me is the big question with Oklahoma City, is like, do they want to get there? Maybe their players, I think, to your point, are just so good that they get there organically. But, if they're intentionally kind of giving like an Ousmane Dieng a bunch of minutes just to see what he is, they're going to be worse, right? So we'll see. But I would say the Minnesota Timberwolves, I gave them as one of my teams last week, but I really just believe in them as a regular season team. I think the Towns and Gobert thing can work in the regular season. I think getting Naz Reid back and developing him last year while Towns was out will go a long way in the regular season for them to just be a deep veteran, like two-way team that is going to be a pain to play. And I think that will transfer into the playoffs. I don't really buy the Minnesota was the hardest matchup for Denver stuff. I think the team that beats you the most times is the hardest matchup. So they should probably, get their head on straight about that.
That was ridiculous. That was just stupid. I'm sorry.
It was. And then, all the Nuggets people kind of backing it up like, yeah, internally the Nuggets did feel that way. It's okay, well.
They're just mad. They're still salty about the sweep, even though they won a championship. Just get over it. You want a title, like, quit being salty.
Yeah, agreed. And as much as Chris Paul being injured is kind of baked into the equation, like, that did happen. And people want to pretend like the game 2 was always going to be a Nuggets win. It wasn't, whatever. Don't need to rehash all of that. But I do think Minnesota is a formidable team. They're big. Jaden McDaniels is their 3. Like, not like they could play, they won't, but like they could go McDaniels, Towns, Reed, Gobert with Ann at the point guard. Like they have unique things about them, but they also just play solid basketball and they're going to get better. So that would be one where I think they'll make a jump this year. I would not want to play them in the playoffs of the teams we expect the Suns to be in range to play. The reason we expect that is being backed up by Vegas, another good indicator, but interesting indicator about where FanDuel at least, but a lot of these books see Phoenix. We'll talk about win totals next. First, today's show brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook. Take your first swing at betting MLB with FanDuel and get tons of money, 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets back up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200. You can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run in the game. Said it before. I will say it again. My 2 allegiances when it comes to baseball are San Diego and the Diamondbacks. Both of those teams love to let games slide away late, which means the first 5 innings bets are the best thing to do in baseball because you don't have to worry about that. It is just who is on the mound to start. What is the offense like on the other side? What do I think will happen? And it really insulates you from mistakes, which is good when you're betting. There's no better place to bet MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. FanDuel, an official partner of Major League Baseball. Coming back, we're talking odds. Perfect timing for FanDuel to sponsor the show, but we're going to hit on win totals. And the Suns right now, Brendon, are at 52.5. The league, or FanDuel doesn't have the entire league listed here because there are these trades up in the air. They do have Clippers odds, which kind of surprised me. Maybe this is most of the league. It feels like not enough tabs to get to 30, but regardless, the Suns are at 52.5. I have the Nuggets pulled up here at 53.5. Does that feel right? That felt high to me, actually. Not even because of the Suns, but where I'll take us first is I just think that there's going to be a decent amount of parity again in the league. And I just don't see it as a season where maybe more than like one team gets over 50 wins, honestly.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And also just the factor that the Suns are going to be targets. They're going to have a target on their back. Like anytime you're playing a team in the regular season, they see Booker, Beal, Durant on the court, that they're going to get those, especially those young teams like the Thunder and the T-Wolves, Jazz, whoever, like in the West, just that want to prove themselves. They're going to come at the Suns. So, and you don't know how hard the Suns are going to try in like all these regular season games, especially those games that quote unquote don't matter as much to them. But yeah, I think obviously the health as well. So there's a lot of factors. I think a lot has to go right for this team to top that. They could definitely blow that out of the water if they really took the regular season serious and they stayed healthy. Like I think just from a talent perspective, they could knock out 60 wins, but I don't think they're going to push that hard in the first place. Not that they're going to take games off or anything, but there's also going to be that adjustment period of trying to figure out how to mesh these guys together too. So they're going to drop some games just naturally trying to work that in. And then we factor in injuries. Yeah, it does seem a little high. But then when you factor in just the pure talent on this team, it kind of feels about like the right range overall. I would probably I'd be a little bit lower just in terms of like regular season on this team. But I think in terms of playoffs, like I'm probably higher. So it's just kind of a balancing act.
Where would you have it? Because I mean, I was thinking about it after I looked at that. And so it's 52.5. I would probably have it at like 49.5. something like that.
Right. So, somewhere in that 50 mark, maybe 50, even like 50, 51. Like that's kind of where I'd place it. So it's not too far behind, but
no.
Yeah, that's if I'm placing my own money. Like, I mean, that's the way you got to look. That's the way I try to look at it anyways. Like when I look at all these and try to find the best values, it's probably not a bet I would make, to be honest, because I feel like it's going to be pretty close. And there's so many variables with total wins for a team like this.
Yeah. As we saw last year, right? I mean, but I would add to your point on the upside part. Cause I do think like, obviously the star power is one upside. One part of the upside is just if all of those guys stay healthy and click, which isn't, I mean, that's why they put him together. That's at least a possibility that it just works really, really well right away.
Especially,
then of course they would,
if they get off to a hot start, especially, and they stay healthy, like they could knock that out pretty quick. But again,
the other part of it is like, they also have young depth, right? So, I mean, like we've kind of been thinking about it as if like, okay, if Keita Bates-Diop, if he hits, like he'll be a starter who can kind of be like a serviceable 3-and-D guy, or like if Jordan Goodwin really jumps off the, expectations and surpasses what we think he's going to do, then like maybe he could start, like that type of thing. But what if they're even better than that? Like I don't think it's crazy to think that Eubanks, or I guess he's sort of blocked out because of the Ayton part of this, but if any of these guys are even better than that, like then you're talking about, potentially another one or two above average rotation players, which is, I don't really think what people think of them as right now. I think it's sort of like a maybe, but if that's better than a maybe and becomes like a really solid piece of their team, or if Eric Gordon just dips into the, fountain of youth. But to get back to the parity thing, to give people a little bit of a taste of what we're talking about here, the Nuggets won 53 games. I think they actually could have gone higher. They just kind of coasted toward the end. But then you only had one other team above 50, which was Memphis at 51, and then Sacramento at 48. And then from there, every other team was between 40 and 45, but really even the 40 is an outlier. Like there were like 6 teams between 42 and 45 from that point on. And then you look and like the current odds are sort of there, but Golden State is at 48.5. You have the Lakers at 47.5, Clippers at 46.5. The Kings are actually a little lower, 44. The Grizzlies are at 46. So I guess there is some agreement. It's just, it really seems like these odds expect the Suns and the Nuggets to just really be on that high end and everybody else to kind of be in the middle, which I mean, wouldn't shock me, but it also comes down to another point you made, which is like, how much do they care about that and try for that? If you're the Suns, like going into training camp when you're just trying to like set the standard, set the expectation for what the season's going to be, would you, Frank Vogel, like tell the team, like, we want to beat out Denver for the 1 seed, like that's our goal? Or do you just think it's like all about a championship, and if they get the 4 seed again, so be it?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. Like, I think obviously you take it day by day and try to win every game in front of you, but at the same time, you have to pace yourself and realize that getting in the playoffs healthy is the most important thing. And, they could be the 2021-22 Suns where they rattle off 64 wins and pour everything in the regular season and then just go in and disappoint in the playoffs. I don't think they're going to be too concerned about the win total. It's more about how these guys are clicking and like vibing off one another. Obviously, home court, I think against Denver specifically, it is a factor. It's something you have to consider. So if you're trying to win the West, like going through Denver is going to be tough. So I think that it should be a factor, but at the same time, like you said, how hard are they actually going to try to dominate the regular season? The talent's there, clearly. I think they're more talented than that 21-22 team that won 64 games. But then you look at the West, just even the Pacific Division alone, it's a bloodbath. Like there's so much talent and parity that, any given night you can get dropped.
Yeah, I don't think any team is going to be able to combine the clutchness, whatever, that's not a word, or the chemistry of that 2022 Suns team, just because Denver, you would think, could be the obvious candidate, but they're going to be integrating a lot of young pieces to their bench. And the Suns just, nobody really can replicate the clutch performance the Suns had. So like, that's just right there. And the Suns are going to have a lot to integrate. And I just don't see another Western Conference team that's going to care about it enough and be able to kind of hit the ground running enough to really get there, which is another reason I think we're going to be pretty much between 45 and 55 for this entire Western Conference this season. I would kind of push for it if I'm being honest, just because I think, again, looking to last year, like it's a bummer to have to play the number 1 seed in the second round, you know? And so I would at least be wanting to get to that 2 or 3. I thought the Suns should have brought Durant back sooner in the regular season last year to try to do that. I thought that they should have just been going for it, been experimenting with their rotation, whatever, just trying to really, really win more than they were until that road trip in Philadelphia, or the games against Philadelphia and Sacramento, when they kind of figured out their rotation in March. But they should have gone harder then. I think they should go hard now, because you want to get a team lower in the standings if we are going to have parity, and you want to avoid playing what we assume would be the number 1 seed as things look now, which is Denver, until the latest that you can. But again, to your point, like they're not going to intentionally rest a bunch of guys for no reason. It really comes down to health, which brings us to our last topic, which is going to be MVP. Also largely decided by health, especially with these new NBA rules around games played, 65. FanDuel has Kevin Durant above Devin Booker in MVP odds, and some interesting names here mixed into the range between them. Are they being undervalued, overvalued? Should one of those guys be way above the other? We'll talk about that all next after one more quick break. And we're closing out the show. We're talking awards. We're talking odds. Let's hit MVP to close things out. The MVP odds to me, Brandon, are always weird this early, because there's just guys that I can immediately kind of cross out. Like Nikola Jokic is plus 430. I don't really see a pathway to him winning MVP again. After the whole debate the past 3 years, and then not winning it this past year, finally getting his championship, you have to be so exemplary and so much better than every other guy in order to get an MVP after you've kind of climbed the mountaintop, that I just don't think it's going to happen. And then there's just, it's Luka Doncic, it's Joel Embiid, just guys where either the narrative or the on-court case is just going to be really hard to make for me. And so I take some of this with a grain of salt, but to bring it to Suns land, plus 1,400 for KD, plus 1,700 for Devin Booker. Those guys are 6th and 8th, respectively, in MVP odds right now. Does that feel right, wrong? Tell me your reaction to seeing that right now.
So to me, I look at it this way. If both these guys stay healthy and the Suns are the 1 seed in the West and exceed expectations, I think there's a pretty good chance one of the two is going to win it. And we saw Devin Booker being the best player on a 64-win Suns team, and he didn't win MVP. So I think that's where that comes from, is like Durant, if he stays healthy and the Suns have a masterclass regular season, like he's probably more likely than Booker to get it, just based off, like you said, narratives are huge. And when it comes to driving this, and that's why Jokic, like you said, it's going to be tough. He's going to have to almost exceed what he's already doing. And the Nuggets are going to have to really just probably win 60 plus games for him to win it again, because of voter fatigue.
That's interesting that you say that, though, about the narrative, because the Booker, you don't think the idea of like Booker having to be kind of more of a playmaker, and this being like Booker's team and all that. Like I was thinking about the narrative, and I even with that still kind of felt like Booker would get the momentum behind him in a way that KD, after another, move to a different team and all this stuff and whatever, would kind of get downgraded as a result of that. But then again, KD was dealing with a bunch of drama last year, and people thought of him as a real MVP candidate until he got hurt. True.
Yeah. And hey, maybe we get co-MVPs again, and it's Durant and Booker. I don't know how that'd work with like the odds and everything, but it's just tough, because I feel like you could flip a coin based off how the season goes if they're both healthy and what the final numbers look like and everything. But I think having Beal too, just helping both those guys out in terms of making their life a lot easier offensively. I'm just super excited to watch this offense, to be honest with you. And like, just when it comes to awards, like I don't think the Suns are going to really have a shot of any of their guys winning MVP, just because of the trying to split the workload between those three and injuries and everything. But yeah, just comparing those two specifically, it's definitely an interesting case. And I'd just like to see Booker get a little more respect if he does stay healthy and the Suns are the top in the seed in the West again.
I think some people, speaking of kind of crossing folks out immediately, would see the Suns as a team to not invest in terms of early bets like this, just because I think they might, to your point, kind of cancel each other out. Like, I think outside of Phoenix, people who maybe aren't so in tune to the Booker's going to have the ball in his hand stuff, or maybe the importance that KD figures to have defensively that might give him a leg up and those types of things, they might see like, okay, even if Durant and Booker cross that 65 game threshold, and even if the Suns, let's say, get the 1 seed, well, odds are they're going to both have enough of a case that neither of them would win it. And so it is an interesting dynamic because they're both so great, and you could make the case that they're both top 10 players. No other team really has that dynamic of 2 top 10 players. Obviously, we've seen it in the past, like Griffin and Chris Paul, or KD and Steph, and those types of things. But this is off the Suns' path, because I think we both agree, like, either of them winning it would be somewhat of a surprise. Who do you like here? Because, like, Embiid finally got his. Jokic, we just discussed. Some of these other guys, it revolves around a lot of team success that we're not sure of, like Luka or Steph or Lillard, who is behind Booker, way behind Booker. This Booker's kind of the top 8 is really where it is. But whether it's in that top 8 or even out of it, like, who would be your pick right now?
Going back to my answer earlier, I think it's Thunder season. I think it's going to be Shea. I think the Thunder are going to take that leap, and he's going to get a lot of credit for it. If they break into that top, 4 spots in the West, which I think they can, that's how high I'm. Like, I think that's a great value. Like, he's not my pick to win it, but I'm saying, like, if I'm going to throw down some money, like, to me, that's like the sleeper pick. And just based on narratives and the way voting goes, like, he's the one that has the highest leap, like, ability to make a leap into that group. And that's usually what they kind of go for when it comes to pushing those narratives. So if the Thunder overachieve and Shea's putting up absurd numbers again, I think he's going to get a lot of that love. Like, he made the first team last year, and
he got some like lower ballot MVP votes, I think, right, this past year. Yeah.
And that's without them even sniffing the top 4 or 5 seeds. So, I mean, if they really make that leap, I think that's the guy that could get some credit for it. And then, I mean, if Miami gets Dame and he just goes berserk there and helps them guide them to 1 seed, that's another option I think could be realistic, just because I think that redemption arc in a way of coming back from a few irrelevant seasons in Portland, like that's another narrative that could be driven pretty hard.
That was the one I was going to say. I'm not sure if the NBA would do some behind the scenes lobbying to make sure that guy doesn't get rewarded for his season after sending a memo out. Don't
vote for this guy. He's
interrogating his agent and all this stuff. Kind of crazy. Yeah. I also just wish that the league that any of these books, maybe some free advice. Maybe there are places that have stuff like this. There's plenty of out of the box things to bet on in 2023, but the idea of like, will win a future MVP, like, just to be able to put some money on, like, this guy has one up his sleeve, but I don't want to have to get it right the exact year that it's going to happen. I would love, like, Anthony Edwards, I'm looking at plus 6,000. I feel like he has an MVP in him at some point, but I don't think it's going to be this year. So I don't want to put money at plus 6,000 for him. I think he could do it. I hope maybe somebody out there can tell me that exists. My pick would be Giannis. And it's a precarious case because I think the Bucks, like, a lot has to go right for them, injury wise, just offensive performance wise, bench wise. The coach has to click. But I think if they can be a top seed, not literally the number 1 seed, but let's say a top 1, 2, 3 seed in the East and win a bunch of games, and Giannis can show, like, after the Heat stuff and the way they went out and the new coach being hired and this new era kind of starting to arrive for them, that he's still that guy. I think if he had stayed healthy and at his best, he might have won it last year. And I think it narrative wise is going to be there even more for him this year because of so much doubt and questioning around that team. So great players win more than 2, right? Like, we kind of are like, oh, he got his, but the best players we've ever seen tend to win more than 2. So I think this might be his year. That would be my pick. The Luka stuff is always so crazy to me. It's like, can he prove it first, please? Come on. Can he get like a top seed and have a dominant, like, start to finish regular season for a really legitimately great team before, like, he's just in the top 3 to 5 in MVP stuff every year. It's crazy.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just wild how much like the narrative drives everything when it comes to this stuff, like, and how much it changes every season for certain guys and other guys it doesn't change. Like it's just, yeah, it's
He's
mind
skinny
boggling
now
sometimes.
though. He lost a bunch of weight again.
Yeah. Off-season video season. That's
cone drills and
oh man, DeAndre and crossing up kindergartners and all kinds of crazy stuff.
I'm just ready crossing me up, basically, was what that video was. It's wacky, but it intrigued me that KD was higher than Book, which is why I kind of had the thought on a lot of this stuff. And top, 6 out of the top 8 in terms of odds is solid. And again, there is a drop off. I do think like the Dame is the next guy there. And again, if the Heat trade happens, I would imagine he will bump up into the real mix there, and he will get some action behind him. Just because, like, to me, he'll probably play the most out of those guys and be the most day-to-day impactful, even though Jimmy might be the better player, quote unquote. I don't know. I'm excited to watch that team too, but we'll see. That'll wrap us up though. Back Wednesday, hoping to get a Lakers guest on to really do a deep dive on Frank Vogel. I feel like I've said that 10 times on the show and haven't made it happen yet. So that's the goal. Friday, we'll be back with Aaron Edwards. That'll be the schedule for just August. Nothing to worry about. We'll be back in September when things really start up again for the NBA. Bonus episodes if any of these crazy trades happen about how they affect the Suns. So do not panic, but hit follow or subscribe if you're finding us for the first time. 3 shows a week is still more than most people are doing. So it'll be plenty of content. We'll get there together and we'll get into the season and really go back to normal. I'll talk to you guys then.